Elena Torres gripped the resignation letter so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The morning sunlight filtered through the glass building of Sterling and Associates Financial Group, but she barely noticed its warmth. Her brown eyes, usually bright with determination, were red and swollen from crying. At 28 years old, she had moved from her quiet hometown of Millbrook to the bustling city with dreams of building a career in finance. Instead, she had spent 9 months enduring a nightmare. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Elena stepped inside, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and despair. She couldn't take another day of Patricia Hunt's cruelty. This morning had been the final straw when Patricia had deliberately spilled coffee on Elena's presentation documents in front of the entire team, then blamed her for being careless. The wrong door opens. Her hands trembled as she clutched the letter against her chest. She had practiced her resignation speech 100 times last night, each word carefully chosen to maintain her dignity. The elevator stopped at the 12th floor, and Elena walked with determined steps toward what she thought was Patricia's office. Without knocking, fueled by months of pent-up frustration and hurt, she pushed open the heavy wooden door. "I can't do this anymore, Patricia," Elena's voice cracked with emotion as she held out the letter. "I refuse to let you treat me like I'm worthless. Here's my resignation, and I hope you're satisfied with destroying someone who only wanted to work hard and prove themselves." But the figure behind the massive mahogany desk wasn't Patricia Hunt. Elena's words died in her throat as she realized her terrible mistake. The man looking at her with surprised gray eyes was James Whitmore, the company's chief executive officer. He was known throughout Sterling and Associates as brilliant but distant, a man who had built the company into a powerhouse after his father's retirement. People spoke his name with respect tinged with fear. An unexpected kindness. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She had just barged into the CEO's private office, crying and shouting like an unstable person. Her career wasn't just over at this company, it was destroyed everywhere in the industry. Word would spread. She would be labeled as the emotional woman who couldn't handle corporate life. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, backing toward the door. "This is mortifying. I thought this was someone else's office. I'll leave immediately." "Wait." James's voice was firm but not unkind. He stood from his chair, and Elena noticed how tall he was, probably over 6 feet. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his charcoal suit fit him like it had been made specifically for his frame. But what surprised her most was the expression on his face. Instead of anger or irritation, she saw genuine concern. He walked around his desk with careful movements, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Please don't leave. Sit down." He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "I'd like to understand what's happening." Elena remained frozen near the door, clutching her resignation letter like a shield. "Mr. Whitmore, I've already embarrassed myself enough. You don't need to be polite about this." "I'm not being polite." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. "I'm being concerned. You're clearly upset, and you mentioned something about not being able to continue. As the head of this company, I need to know when my employees are suffering." The story unfolds. Something in his tone made Elena take the handkerchief. It was soft, expensive linen, and smelled faintly of cedar and something else she couldn't identify. She dabbed at her eyes, feeling foolish. "It's really nothing that concerns you, Mr. Whitmore. Just a personality conflict with my supervisor." "Patricia Hunt?" he asked, and Elena's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know?" James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You said you thought this was her office. This floor has only 2 offices, mine and hers, right next door. Please, sit down and tell me what's been happening." Against her better judgment, Elena found herself sinking into the leather chair. Maybe it was the exhaustion from months of stress, or maybe it was the unexpected gentleness in his usually stern features, but the words began pouring out. She told him about the constant criticism of her work, even when her analyses were accurate. She described how Patricia mocked her accent and her hometown, calling her the country girl who doesn't understand city standards. She explained how Patricia took credit for Elena's best work while blaming her for any mistakes. James listened without interrupting, his gray eyes never leaving her face. Elena noticed small details about him as she spoke, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the way his fingers drummed once on the desk when she mentioned Patricia's uncle, the tightening of his mouth when she described this morning's coffee incident. A protective instinct awakens. How long has this been going on? James asked when she finished. About 6 months. It started slowly, so at first I thought I was being too sensitive. But then it got worse. Have you documented these incidents? Elena nodded. I kept a journal. My roommate Sophie suggested it, in case I ever needed proof. But honestly, Mr. Whitmore, what's the point? Patricia's uncle is Robert Hunt, one of your biggest investors. Everyone knows you can't touch her without risking the company's financial stability. Something flashed in James's eyes, anger, perhaps, but directed outward, not at her. Elena, may I call you Elena? She nodded, surprised he even knew her first name. Elena, I built this company on the principle that talent and integrity matter more than connections. My father always taught me that a business without ethical foundations will eventually collapse, no matter how much money props it up. He stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Elena watched him, confused by his reaction. She had expected dismissal, maybe even anger at her outburst. Instead, he seemed genuinely troubled by her situation. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, James said, turning to face her. The morning light behind him created a silhouette that made him look even more imposing. Do you want to leave this company, or do you want to stay and do the work you're clearly passionate about? Elena opened her mouth, then closed it. She thought about her apartment that she could barely afford, her student loans, the job applications she'd have to start sending if she quit. But more than that, she thought about the financial models she created, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the dream of proving that a girl from Millbrook could succeed in the corporate world. The promise of protection. I want to stay, she admitted quietly. But I don't want to spend every day feeling worthless. James walked back to his desk and picked up his phone. Then you're not going anywhere. I'm calling Human Resources right now to start a formal investigation. I want you to provide them with your documentation. And Elena? He paused, his gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Until this is resolved, you report directly to me. No one will treat you as worthless in my company. Not while I have something to say about it. Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The most powerful man in the company was personally intervening on behalf of a low-level analyst he'd never even met before today. It didn't make sense. People like him didn't do things like this for people like her. Something flickered across James's face, an emotion Elena couldn't quite identify. Good. You deserve colleagues who treat you with respect. Over the next 2 weeks, James found increasingly creative reasons to visit Elena's floor. One day it was to personally deliver updated security protocols. Another time he needed her input on a client presentation. Each visit lasted longer than necessary, their conversations flowing from work topics to personal interests. Elena learned that James had studied piano as a child but gave it up for business school. He discovered that she loved old movies and could quote entire scenes from classic films. They debated economic theories over coffee, and somehow those debates turned into discussions about favorite books, childhood memories, and dreams they had abandoned along the way. Dangerous proximity. One Friday afternoon, James asked Elena to help him retrieve documents from the executive printer on the 15th floor. The hallway was deserted, most employees having left early for the weekend. I'm starting to think you don't actually need help with these tasks, Elena said as they walked, surprising herself with her boldness. James glanced at her, amusement dancing in his eyes. What makes you say that? Because the CEO of a major financial firm probably has an assistant who handles printing documents. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. They were standing close together in the empty hallway, and Elena became acutely aware of his height, his presence, the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "You're right," James admitted, his voice dropping lower. "I don't need help with the printer." "Then why?" Elena's question died as James took a small step closer. "Because these are the only moments I can justify being near you without raising questions," he said quietly. "And Elena, I find myself wanting those moments more than I should." Elena's breath caught. The air between them felt charged with electricity. She knew she should step back, maintain professional distance, but her feet wouldn't move. "Mr. Whitmore, James," he corrected softly. "When we're alone, please call me James." "James," she whispered, and something blazed in his eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. "This is complicated. You're my CEO, and I'm still dealing with the investigation, I know." His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. "Believe me, I know all the reasons this is inappropriate. I've listed them 100 times. But Elena, I can't stop thinking about you. Not since the moment you walked into my office with tears on your face and fire in your eyes." The storm approaches. Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. She pulled it out, her face paling as she read. "What is it?" James asked immediately, his tone shifting to concern. "It's from Human Resources. Patricia has filed a counter-complaint, claiming I've been spreading false accusations to damage her reputation. She's demanding I be terminated immediately, and her uncle has scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday morning to discuss my employment status." James's expression hardened into something fierce. "Let me see that." He read the message, and Elena watched anger transform his features. "This is retaliation. Clear as day." "But her uncle controls 20% of company shares," Elena said, her voice shaking. "If he withdraws his investment, the company could be in serious trouble." "James, I don't want to be responsible for." "Stop." James caught her hand, his touch warm and steady. "You are not responsible for Robert Hunt's corruption or his niece's cruelty. This is exactly what they want, for you to feel guilty and disappear quietly." "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me. Why would you risk problems with an important investor for someone you just met?" James set down the phone and looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "Because I recognize exceptional work when I see it. That market analysis you submitted last month, the one Patricia presented as her own? I implemented 3 of your recommendations, and they've already shown promising returns. You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss." Elena felt tears threatening again, but this time they were different. Someone had seen her work. Someone had valued it. And not just anyone, the CEO himself. "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. "That's because Patricia took the credit." James's expression hardened again. "But I always review the metadata on documents. I know who really wrote what. And Elena, your talent deserves to be protected and nurtured, not crushed by someone who feels threatened by it." As Elena left his office 20 minutes later, her resignation letter torn into pieces in his wastebasket, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. But she also felt something else, something more confusing, a flutter in her chest every time she replayed the intensity in James Whitmore's eyes when he promised to protect her. She didn't know it yet, but that accidental meeting had set in motion a chain of events that would transform both their lives forever. 3 days had passed since Elena's tearful encounter with James Whitmore, and she found herself watching the elevator doors every time they opened. She told herself it was nervous anticipation about the investigation, but deep down, she knew better. She was looking for him. On Thursday morning, her wish came true in the most unexpected way. "Good morning, Elena." That deep voice made her heart skip before she even looked up from her computer screen. James stood beside her desk, holding 2 cups of coffee. He wore a navy suit today that made his gray eyes appear even more striking. Several of her colleagues had stopped working, their curious gazes fixed on the unusual sight of the CEO visiting their floor. "Mr. Whitmore," Elena managed, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Is everything all right with the investigation? May I?" He gestured to the empty chair beside her desk. Elena nodded, too surprised to speak. James sat down with an easy grace and handed her one of the coffee cups. "Brazilian blend. I remembered you mentioned missing the coffee from that little cafe in your hometown." Elena accepted the cup with trembling hands. When had she mentioned that? Then she remembered, during their long conversation in his office, she had rambled nervously about Millbrook, including the coffee shop where she used to study. He had been listening to everything, remembering details that seemed insignificant. "The investigation is progressing well," James continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But I wanted to discuss something else with you. I'm reorganizing some of the analytical teams, and I need someone with your skills to help evaluate potential portfolio adjustments." The growing connection. Elena's colleague Daniel Brooks approached them, his expression tense. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know you were visiting our department today. Is there something I can help with?" James looked up with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just consulting with Ms. Torres on a project." "Thank you, Daniel." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had been friendly with Elena since her first week, often bringing her lunch and offering help with complex calculations. Lately, though, she had noticed something more intense in the way he looked at her. After Daniel walked away, James leaned slightly closer. "Is he bothering you?" "No, he's actually been very kind," Elena said quickly. "He's one of the few people who didn't avoid me after Patricia started her campaign." Something flickered across James's face, an emotion Elena couldn't quite identify. "Good. You deserve colleagues who treat you with respect." Over the next 2 weeks, James found increasingly creative reasons to visit Elena's floor. One day it was to personally deliver updated security protocols. Another time he needed her input on a client presentation. Each visit lasted longer than necessary, their conversations flowing from work topics to personal interests. Elena learned that James had studied piano as a child but gave it up for business school. He discovered that she loved old movies and could quote entire scenes from classic films. They debated economic theories over coffee, and somehow those debates turned into discussions about favorite books, childhood memories, and dreams they had abandoned along the way. Dangerous proximity. One Friday afternoon, James asked Elena to help him retrieve documents from the executive printer on the 15th floor. The hallway was deserted, most employees having left early for the weekend. "I'm starting to think you don't actually need help with these tasks," Elena said as they walked, surprising herself with her boldness. James glanced at her, amusement dancing in his eyes. "What makes you say that?" "Because the CEO of a major financial firm probably has an assistant who handles printing documents." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. They were standing close together in the empty hallway, and Elena became acutely aware of his height, his presence, the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "You're right," James admitted, his voice dropping lower. "I don't need help with the printer." "Then why?" Elena's question died as James took a small step closer. "Because these are the only moments I can justify being near you without raising questions," he said quietly. "And Elena, I find myself wanting those moments more than I should." Elena's breath caught. The air between them felt charged with electricity. She knew she should step back, maintain professional distance, but her feet wouldn't move. "Mr. Whitmore." "James," he corrected softly. "When we're alone, please call me James." "James," she whispered, and something blazed in his eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. "This is complicated. You're my CEO, and I'm still dealing with the investigation." "I know. His hand lifted as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. Believe me, I know all the reasons this is inappropriate. I've listed them 100 times. But Elena, I can't stop thinking about you. Not since the moment you walked into my office with tears on your face and fire in your eyes. The storm approaches. Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. She pulled it out, her face paling as she read. What is it? James asked immediately, his tone shifting to concern. It's from Human Resources. Patricia has filed a counter-complaint, claiming I've been spreading false accusations to damage her reputation. She's demanding I be terminated immediately, and her uncle has scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday morning to discuss my employment status. James's expression hardened into something fierce. Let me see that. He read the message, and Elena watched anger transform his features. This is retaliation. Clear as day. But her uncle controls 20% of company shares, Elena said, her voice shaking. If he withdraws his investment, the company could be in serious trouble. James, I don't want to be responsible for. Stop. James caught her hand, his touch warm and steady. You are not responsible for Robert Hunt's corruption or his niece's cruelty. This is exactly what they want, for you to feel guilty and disappear quietly. What are you going to do? James looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. Something I should have done when my father was still running this company. I'm going to choose what's right over what's convenient. Revelations and jealousy. That weekend, Elena couldn't stop thinking about James's words and the way he had held her hand. On Monday morning, she arrived at work early, her stomach churning with anxiety about the board meeting. Daniel intercepted her at her desk. Elena, I heard about the emergency meeting. I want you to know I gave a statement to Human Resources about Patricia's behavior. Several of us did. Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot. He hesitated, then blurted out, Is something going on between you and Whitmore? Elena felt her face flush. I don't know what you mean. Come on, Elena. He's been down here almost every day. The way he looks at you, Daniel's expression was pained. I thought maybe you and I could have had something. But I can't compete with the CEO. Daniel, I never meant to lead you on. I know. He gave her a sad smile. He's a lucky man, even if he doesn't realize the complications he's creating for you. The board meeting showdown. At 10 o'clock, Elena was summoned to the boardroom. Her hands were ice cold as she entered the imposing space. James sat at the head of the long table, his expression unreadable. Robert Hunt sat to his right, his heavy features set in smug satisfaction. Patricia wasn't present, employees weren't allowed at board meetings unless specifically called to testify. Ms. Torres, Robert Hunt began without preamble, you've made some very serious accusations against my niece, who has been nothing but an exemplary employee for 3 years. I believe this is a malicious attempt to cover your own inadequacies. Elena opened her mouth to respond, but James spoke first. Mr. Hunt, before you continue, I'd like to present some findings. James pulled up a presentation on the large screen. This is an analysis of project attributions over the past 6 months. The blue bars represent work originally created by Ms. Torres. The red bars show work that Ms. Hunt claimed as her own. The chart was damning. Nearly 70% of Patricia's supposedly brilliant analyses had been stolen from Elena's work. Furthermore, James continued, his voice cold and precise, we have testimony from 5 employees, email evidence, and security footage of the coffee incident last month. Ms. Hunt's behavior constitutes clear harassment and fraud. Robert Hunt's face reddened. This is outrageous. If you pursue this, James, I'll withdraw every penny of my investment. Your father would never have risked the company's stability over one disposable employee. The room fell silent. Elena felt sick. She had been called disposable in front of the entire board. James stood slowly, his presence commanding every eye in the room. "You're right about one thing, Robert. My father wouldn't have handled this the way I'm about to. He was more diplomatic, more willing to compromise with people like you." He turned to face the full board. "But I'm not my father. And I won't build this company on a foundation of protecting bullies because they have money. If Mr. Hunt chooses to withdraw his investment over our decision to uphold basic human decency and employee protection, then we'll survive without him." Standing firm. "You're making a mistake," Robert Hunt growled. "No." James's voice was absolute. "The mistake was allowing toxic behavior to go unchecked because we feared financial consequences. Ms. Torres is one of the most talented analysts we have. Her market predictions have earned this company millions in the short time she's been here. We don't dispose of talent, we protect it." He looked directly at Elena then, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her heart race. "We protect the people who make this company worth building in the first place." Robert Hunt stood abruptly. "Then you've lost my investment and my support. Don't come crawling back when your numbers drop." "I won't need to," James replied calmly. "Board members, I'm calling for a vote on Ms. Hunt's termination and the implementation of stronger anti-harassment policies." The vote was unanimous. Patricia was terminated effective immediately. Robert Hunt stormed out of the boardroom, his threats echoing down the hallway. After the other board members filed out, only Elena and James remained. She stood slowly, her legs shaking. "You just lost $20 million because of me," she whispered. James walked around the table until he stood in front of her. "I didn't lose anything that mattered. Elena, I need you to understand something. This wasn't about you or Patricia or even Robert Hunt. This was about the kind of company I want to lead. And that company doesn't sacrifice good people to appease bad ones. But the financial impact will be manageable. I've already contacted 3 other investors who are interested in that funding gap. By the end of the week, we'll have replaced Hunt's investment with partnerships that actually align with our values." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I had a talented analyst run the numbers for me. She predicted we'd be fine." Elena felt tears threatening, but this time they were tears of relief and something warmer. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Then don't thank me yet." James's expression grew serious. "Elena, I need to be honest with you about something. My actions today weren't purely professional. They should have been, but they weren't. The truth is, I've developed feelings for you that go beyond appropriate workplace boundaries." Elena's heart thundered in her chest as James's words hung in the air between them. The boardroom suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, despite its massive size and the wall of windows overlooking the city skyline. "I know the timing is terrible," James continued, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "You've just been through a traumatic situation, and I'm still your boss. But Elena, I can't keep pretending that my interest in your case was purely about justice. Every time I found an excuse to visit your floor, every coffee I brought you, every moment I engineered to be near you, those weren't just about protecting an employee." Elena found her voice, though it trembled. "When did you know?" "The first day." James gave a self-deprecating laugh. "You burst into my office, crying and furious and completely unaware of how extraordinary you were. Most people are terrified of me, Elena. They calculate every word, every gesture. But you were raw and honest and real. You weren't trying to impress me or manipulate me. You were just hurting, and something in me responded to that pain in a way I hadn't felt in years." He took a step closer, and Elena didn't back away. "My mother died when I was 16. She worked for my father's company, and one of his executives made her life miserable for years. Dad didn't know, she hid it from him because she didn't want to cause problems with business relationships. By the time he found out, the stress had contributed to her heart condition. She died before he could fix things. James, Elena breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for his. I'm so sorry. He wrapped his fingers around hers, his touch warm and grounding. When you walked into my office that day, it was like seeing her pain reflected in someone I could actually help. But then I got to know you, and it stopped being about her. It became about you, your brilliant mind, your kindness despite what you'd endured, the way you light up when discussing market trends, how you bite your lip when you're concentrating. Elena realized she was doing exactly that, biting her lip as emotions swirled through her. I thought I was imagining the connection between us. I told myself it was impossible, that someone like you couldn't be interested in someone like me. Someone like you? James lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb gently brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Elena, you're remarkable. Your background, your accent, where you came from, those things make you who you are. They don't diminish you. They enhance you. The kiss that changes everything. Elena looked up at him, at the sincerity in those gray eyes that had haunted her dreams for weeks. I have feelings for you too. I've been fighting them because they seemed so inappropriate, so impossible. But James, every time you walked into that office, my whole day got brighter. Every conversation we had, I found myself wishing it would never end. Elena, he murmured, and the way he said her name was like a caress. I want to do this right. I want to date you properly, take you to dinner, get to know everything about you. But I need you to know that there will be talk. People will say you got ahead because of me, that the investigation was fake, that I showed favoritism. Let them talk, Elena interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. I know the truth. You know the truth. My work speaks for itself, and it always will. I won't let fear of gossip steal this from us. James's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face into something breathtaking. You're sure? I'm sure. Elena stepped closer, eliminating the last bit of distance between them. Kiss me, James. He didn't need to be asked twice. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, almost reverent, as if he was afraid she might disappear. But when Elena's arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, the kiss deepened into something passionate and honest and full of all the feelings they had been suppressing for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to do everything by the book from here forward. You'll report to a different supervisor, someone who can evaluate your work objectively. I won't give anyone ammunition to diminish your accomplishments. Okay, Elena agreed, then smiled mischievously. But that doesn't mean you have to stop bringing me coffee. James laughed, the sound rich and warm. Never. Proving herself. Over the next 2 months, Elena threw herself into her work with renewed energy. James kept his promise. She was transferred to report directly to the chief financial officer, a no-nonsense woman named Gloria Martinez who cared only about results. The investigation concluded with Patricia being blacklisted from the industry for fraud, while Robert Hunt quietly withdrew from public business dealings. But the real test came when Sterling and Associates landed its biggest potential client yet, the Donovan Corporation, a tech giant looking to restructure its international investments. The presentation would be made to a room full of skeptical executives who had heard rumors about the girl the CEO was sleeping with. Gloria assigned Elena to lead the analysis team, a move that raised eyebrows throughout the company. Show them what you're made of, Gloria told her bluntly. Or prove the gossip's right. Your choice. Elena worked 18-hour days for 3 weeks, building financial models and projections that accounted for every possible variable. Daniel and 2 other analysts worked with her, and despite the initial awkwardness, they formed a strong team. James deliberately stayed away from the project, though Elena caught him watching her through his office window sometimes, pride evident in his expression. The day of the presentation arrived. Elena stood before the Donovan executives in her best suit, her presentation loaded and ready, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Gentlemen, she began, I'm going to show you why Sterling and Associates is uniquely positioned to handle your portfolio restructuring. But first, let me address the elephant in the room. The executives exchanged glances. One of them, an older man with skeptical eyes, leaned forward. And what elephant would that be, Ms. Torres? You've heard I'm romantically involved with our CEO. You're wondering if I got this project because of that relationship rather than merit. Elena's voice was clear and confident. Let me show you exactly why I'm standing here. For the next hour, she walked them through the most comprehensive market analysis they had ever seen. She anticipated their questions before they asked them. She demonstrated knowledge of international markets that stunned even Gloria. And when one executive tried to trip her up with a complex question about Southeast Asian currency fluctuations, Elena not only answered it but provided insights that made him sit back with an impressed whistle. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the lead executive, Jonathan Donovan himself, stood up and began to applaud. The others joined him. Ms. Torres, Donovan said with a genuine smile, that was the most thorough presentation I've seen in 30 years of business. Who you're dating is irrelevant when you have a mind like that. Sterling and Associates has our business, and I want you personally overseeing the implementation. The celebration. That evening, James took Elena to the roof of the Sterling and Associates building, which had been transformed with strings of lights and a table set for two. The city sparkled below them, a perfect backdrop for celebration. You were magnificent today, James said, pouring champagne into crystal glasses. Gloria called me after the meeting. She said Donovan specifically requested that you be promoted to senior analyst. Elena accepted the glass, her eyes shining. I proved it, James. To them, to myself, to everyone who thought I was just the CEO's girlfriend. You were always more than that. James raised his glass. To Elena Torres, brilliant analyst and the woman who stormed into my office and changed my life. They clinked glasses, and Elena took a sip before setting it down. I need to tell you something. Sophie, my roommate, asked me an interesting question last week. She wanted to know what I was most proud of from these past few months. And what did you answer? I told her it wasn't winning the Donovan account, though that was incredible. And it wasn't even surviving Patricia's harassment and coming out stronger. Elena moved closer to James, taking his hands in hers. I was most proud of letting myself be vulnerable with you. Of trusting that what we have is real, despite all the obstacles and gossip and complications. James set down his own glass and pulled her into his arms. It is real, Elena. The most real thing in my life. I'm in love with you. Not because you're brilliant, though you are. Not because you're beautiful, though you are. But because you're brave and honest and you make me want to be a better man and a better leader. I love you too, Elena whispered against his chest, hearing his heart beat strong and steady beneath her ear. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. For protecting me when I felt powerless. For loving me when I felt unlovable. Always, James promised, tilting her chin up to kiss her under the stars. Always. 6 months later. The executive elevator opened, and Elena Torres, now Director of International Markets, stepped out carrying 2 coffees and a briefcase full of reports. She had just returned from a successful negotiation in Singapore, and her first stop was James's office. She knocked on the door, a courtesy she insisted on maintaining despite James's protests that she could enter any time. Come in, his familiar voice called. Elena opened the door to find him reviewing documents at his desk. When he saw her, his serious expression transformed into that smile he reserved only for her. You're back. How was the flight? Long, but productive. She set one of the coffees on his desk. Brazilian blend, just how you like it. James stood and walked around the desk, pulling her into a kiss that was warm with welcome. I missed you. I was only gone 4 days, Elena laughed. 4 days too long. He kept one arm around her waist as he reached into his desk drawer. "I have something for you. Early anniversary present." "Our anniversary isn't for 2 weeks," Elena protested, but her eyes lit up with curiosity. James pulled out a small velvet box, and Elena's breath caught. "I know. But I've been carrying this around for a month, and I can't wait anymore." He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light and sparkled like the city had that night on the roof. "Elena Torres," James said, taking her hand, "will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that walking into the wrong office was actually walking into exactly the right place at exactly the right time?" Elena felt tears, happy ones this time, sliding down her cheeks. "Yes. Absolutely yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her again, Elena thought about that morning 9 months ago when she had been crying in the elevator, preparing to resign from a job that was killing her spirit. She had walked through the wrong door and found not just salvation from a toxic situation, but the love of her life. Sometimes, she thought as James held her close, the best things happen when you're brave enough to be broken in front of the right person. And sometimes, the person who sees you at your worst becomes the person who brings out your very best. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you more," James replied. "And I have the rest of our lives to prove it." Outside the window, the city continued its endless rhythm, but inside that office, 2 people who had found each other in the most unexpected way were beginning their greatest adventure yet.